Right, I'm going to start by asking a question. Hands up, who can recite all 7 Barcelona principles? Over here, sir. Right, go on. On your feet.
Goal setting is important. Outcomes versus outputs.
Perfect.
Social media needs to be monitored.
3 down.
AVEs are not the value
Number 4.
of public relations. It should be replicable if you use the same methodologies, etc., etc.
One more to go, I think.
Let me think.
Something about quality.
Quantity and quality.
Give the man a hand, Francois from South Africa. Woo! And you, sir, win a Barcelona Principles T-shirt. I did that to make a small point. I actually carry around in my pocket, as a few of you know, a little card. It's a bit dorky, but it has the principles on it because I can't remember them nearly as well as Francois can. And some of the research we're going to share with you today suggests a lot of people have heard of the principles, but not many of them can do what Francois can do. So this session is an important step in a journey that we started a few years ago. And we've made really good progress, but there is clearly still a huge amount of confusion in the marketplace about principles, metrics, frameworks, and so on. So we really need to make a final push to embed measurement as an integral part of communications and PR practice, both in-house and within consultancies. We've done a lot. Let's think about what we've done. Well, we launched the Barcelona Principles 5 years ago with other partners in the industry. And they are referenced a lot, they're used a lot, but not nearly as much as they could be. It all started with the Barcelona Principles, and then we logically moved on to developing frameworks. We used the Barcelona Principles to start to try to ban the use of AVEs, and we developed our own frameworks and metrics the following year to try and encourage take-up of alternatives. We then naturally followed that by launching the social media measurement framework, which Richard was so integral to, as was Don Bartholomew, as we heard yesterday. But we have a problem, because the research that we've done, that Christina is about to share with you, tells us that despite all of that good work, AVEs are still being widely used. And I know we said a couple of times over the last couple of days, we shouldn't be talking about AVEs whilst the rest of the world is talking about more advanced stuff, but we should do, because we've got to nail this on the head once and for all. And this is our opportunity to do it. We're all using different metrics. Some people are using proprietary metrics, but the industry is looking for leadership. The research tells us that the PR industry is in a state of flux, but is looking for leadership and is looking for standardization. And by the end of today, what we want to do, what we want to leave Stockholm with, is a clear way forward. We want to establish some clarity and transparency in the industry. We want to develop a suite well, not even a suite. We want to develop an integrated framework that we can promote and that we can use to lead the industry. And we want to, furthermore, pledge our support for the Barcelona Principles, as Francois clearly has done. But we want to promote them so that people haven't just heard about them, but they actually understand what they mean and how they can help. So the first part of establishing what we need to do is surveying the market, and we've done that. AMEC carried out a survey which Gorkana Group sponsored and executed. We surveyed 600 communications professionals, and we looked at the extent of marketplace confusion. We asked about the Barcelona Principles, we asked about the frameworks, and the second part of shaping our future involves everybody here today. And it's going to work a little bit like this. First off, we're going to hear the results of that research in a second. Christina's going to take us through it. And then Richard and Elaine are going to start to introduce us to what a new integrated framework might look like. When we started this work, I think there was a lot of noise within the organisation about concern that we were going to come up with new set of metrics, one single number, a like-for-like replacement for the AVE. Fear not, we're not doing that. A lot of what we're going to be doing today is actually about promoting a lot of the work that we've already done and making sure that we all collectively commit to do things that help us to develop the industry and grow the industry. We're going to break into two groups to discuss the two major themes today. Group A will stay in here and we'll talk to a panel that Richard and Christina are going to lead, talking about an integrated framework, and there'll be a separate discussion going on at the same time, which will be led by my Vice Chair, Chris Foster, and David Gallagher, who are going to be talking about how we develop and promote and recommit to the principles. So let me first off introduce you to Christina Liao. Christina is Global Director of Research and Analytics at Fleishman Hillard. She's going to summarize what we found in new research that we have conducted in the last couple of months. Christina, over to you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Before I start, I just want to make a quick point. I thought it's ironic that the person who actually can memorize the Barcelona principle get the T-shirt with them on it. I feel like the rest of us should get it as a constant reminder, right? He clearly doesn't need it.
There was a misprint. What it was actually going to say at the top is "I'm principled."
Oh, there you go. That would have been better. Well, first, thank you, Jeremy. And also, before I start, I want to thank everyone, because I think a lot of you probably responded to this survey. And I want to thank Gorkana Group for fielding this survey very quickly, because we have a very short turnaround time. And also for all of you who not only fill out the survey yourself, but also ask your clients, because we do look at results in terms of the agency side responses versus the in-house responses. And we actually see some pretty consistent trends in terms of current landscape assessment, where people see the PR communication and our measurement is that, and that's our intent, just to make sure that as we carry this forward to version 2.0, we're actually on the right track. And all of your input is actually critical to us going in that direction. So we really appreciate your input on that. Can we move the slides, or do I move the slides? Okay. So I titled it "Measure What Matters to Actually Win the Game." So I'm not going to go through detail. As you can see from this, in terms of the demographic of the respondents, we do actually have a heavier European representation. So I think all my North America colleagues need to step up to the plate and respond more to the surveys, because as you can see, that 61% were in-house. But then when you look at the geographic representation, we have the 90% with operation in Western Europe. And when we look at the metrics currently in use, as we've been hearing it throughout the summit, that we still have majority of them focused on outputs. I think we are moving in the direction of outcomes and ultimately business results. I think what's interesting to see in the results is that in terms of outcomes, I think some people see outcomes as part of business results, because you can say that as an outcome, right? So whether it's an outcome that we're talking about stay within the communication field, or are we talking about outcomes in the business results? And when we look at the metrics, I'll get into more details. You have the top, you can see the top three here in the three buckets here, and I'll get into more details. Website traffic is still very high up there, and I think it's a reflection of we're still at that output stage, right? We're still counting because it's easier to do, right? And you can show results very quickly. And I think we all feel good about it. You know, we have these huge numbers, right? But it's a question of which numbers and, you know, whether those numbers and which set of numbers really matter, you know, in order to get us to the next stage, as well as getting the C-suite to listen to us and fund more PR and communication campaigns. So overall satisfaction with effectiveness of measurement activities. As we can see, we have majority of people, they are satisfied with our ability to highlight success that can be shared with business. However, if you look at it, there are only about 1/3 of them that are satisfied with guiding future campaign planning, as well as demonstrating the overall impact of communication activities. Right, so we can. So it's on the one hand we say we can demonstrate our success in terms of all the numbers, and again predominantly the output numbers we're talking about. But when we're talking about the next stage, majority of people, I think, recognize and basically indicate that we're not too happy in terms of being able to demonstrate the impact as well as guiding future campaign planning. I think if we can get to that stage, I think the C-suite will be more willing to put more fund into the programs. So the next slide, in terms of overall opinion regarding measurement approach, again, you can see overwhelming majority said there are ways we can improve our evaluation with more sophisticated analysis. And what we see from the survey, I think an area of education and training is an understanding of when we talk about more sophisticated analysis and the different type of modeling techniques, what does each of them mean? I think there was some confusion, for example, in terms of attribution model or predictive analytics. And when we say outcome analysis, how does the attribution model and predictive analytics apply? And on this, particularly on attribution model, what we see is actually a big discrepancy in the understanding between in-house and agency, right? In terms of what that modeling technique would do, because we see a higher percentage of agency wanting to do more attribution model, but about twice as much than the in-house PR counselors. I think it's not necessarily that they don't think that they need it. I think it's more like they don't know what it would do for them. So I think it's important to recognize that. Okay. And then the last point I also want to say is that we have a strong and robust communication evaluation program in place, and you can see, we still have a long road to go. So I think it's important to look at this and see how we, make sure we're going in the right direction, as well as the first one and the last one in terms of ROI, right? In terms of how we can get to that next stage. That's what's lacking. Okay, so where's the focus? So I break this into different sets of metrics. So this slide focused on the media metrics question that we asked. Right? So you can clearly still see, if you look at your left-hand side, the first three is still very much, as we say, counting, volume and numbers and impressions, because those are easy to do. And when we have the big numbers, I think we're already way beyond in terms of getting all the followers, the likes, and all that. So there are clearly gaps as well, and opportunity in terms of engagement, particularly when you get to advocacy and preference, as well as key influencer activity, right? So if you look at the preference, it's very low of all of these metrics, right? So we don't get there. And some of that, I think I was in Richard's social media session earlier. I think some of that require going beyond just staying with the data within the social digital. So we need to combine, for example, survey data, right, to actually get at that. And overall, on the top, just the three main category of metrics I see here. So you can see it's actually fairly consistent, right, between the perception from the in-house as well as from the agency, right, in terms of the media metrics. So if we move on to the more brand and business metrics, right? So again, you can see overall between in-house and agency, they're fairly consistent. I mean, you do see some discrepancy here. So I see here, again, website traffic, as I mentioned earlier, it's easier to track. So you still see overwhelmingly people still indicate that's what they track now, right? In terms of more on the brand, so I see here these are more the operations type of metrics. And then over here on the top-hand side, you have brand perceptions data, net promoter scores. I think someone mentioned tracking net promoter scores, as well as customer satisfaction. Right? So you see a much lower percentage. And then when you get to the actually more what I call the hardcore numbers with business outcomes, you have share price, revenue, and sales lead. Those numbers drop even more significantly. Okay, so this is the perception of the evaluation and measurement, especially in terms of the current landscape. Okay, so how do we evolve and where do we focus? Because we also ask questions about what people see the needs are in terms of future direction. Again, as I said, we want to make sure we're going down the right path, and with the input from all of the delegates being considered. And again, you can see this set of 4 numbers, fairly consistent. I was actually very happy to see The third one, it says, with the right metrics in place, all business will be evaluating their activity in a robust and effective way. I'm happy to see that percent actually is even higher than the other three, because the other three just get at, we need a more integrated metrics. But that third one gets at, well, why do we need that, right? It wasn't just for the sake of just getting a metrics together, right? It's more because we will be able to evaluate in a more effective way, which means that we'll get the attention more with the C-suite, right? So it's kind of like having the end in mind when we're trying to build this more integrated set of metrics. So it's clearly, and you can see, I mean, the percentage is fairly consistent, okay? So what are the barriers? And some of the, so we also ask questions in terms of people clearly identify the gap, right? So what are the barriers in terms of the perception of why are we not there yet, right? So these are the 4 key areas that get the most responses, right? Analytics approach, too time-consuming, too costly, and too complicated. I think the approach being complicated usually is a challenge, right? So when we're in the technical field, we can explain in the technical term, but how do we explain to someone in a CMO or CCO position in order to fund the project that you're trying to do for them? So clearly, that's a barrier that's indicated. Also, lack of access to third-party or company business data. And I think that particular area, particularly with the one with company business, I think there's a sensitivity. There's a data sensitivity around it, right? So particularly when we talk about getting to ROI, it does require having access to some sensitive financial data, right? So unless you have a very trusted, highly trusted relationship with the company, they're usually very reluctant to share that data, right? So I think that clearly is a barrier. There are some third-party data, like Nielsen and some other type of data, that if you spend the money to get the data, you will be able to get the data. But the key is to actually justify why you need to spend the money to get that data, right? So clearly there's still a barrier in that area. And the third part, which is why we want to launch this initiative and having a breakout sessions that we can discuss more, is the lack of availability, education, and awareness of existing framework and guidance, right? So we're not just going out there and say we need more data just for the sake of getting more data, right? So it's a question of why do we need more data and how do we bring the different data sources together to make more meaningful analysis and get the insights out beyond what we currently get, right? So we clearly are getting some of the outputs and even the outcomes and the results currently, but we can get a lot more. So that's an area that we need to be able to clearly define and identify, right? But if we have an overarching framework and guidance, it will allow people to then customize for each of the clients you have. So I call that in terms of us being able to have consistent standards, but customizable metrics, right? So the standards need to be consistent, but every client, their challenges are a little bit different. So it's important that we're able to speak their language, but still being able to map back to that framework and the guidance that we set out. And also, there is also a mention, I haven't heard too much in the sessions here in terms of we oftentimes are too narrowly focused on individual campaign performance in isolation without a more integrated view. And I think that as part of this initiative, in addition to the survey, we also conduct CMO interviews. So these are actually phone interviews. That's actually one of the areas that a couple of the CMOs have indicated is that their way of looking at it is instead of looking at each campaign in isolation, when the CMO go to the CEO to ask for funding, he's aiming at showing the impact in totality of the overall marketing and PR investment, right? So if you look at each individual campaign, there might be some that if you just focus it on it, that may not seem to generate a high level of ROI. But that campaign, the primary objective is actually lead to the next one to become more effective and have a higher ROI, right? So if you look at that one campaign in isolation, you will say, I don't need to do that, without realizing that not doing that actually has an impact on the campaign that you're going to get more higher ROI. Right? So I think that's an important point to keep in mind, and I'm glad that actually someone recognized, and I'm sure it's through the work with the client that we all recognize that. Okay, so what I did is I put together in terms of how do we evolve and where do we focus. When we get into the breakout sessions, right, when we get to the metrics framework, again, I break this out. I think for most companies, there are metrics in all three that are being captured, right? The challenge and the problem is that each of them are being captured in isolation, and they don't talk to each other. So we have a responsibility and role, and we can take a leadership position to say, here's how we can see how to link them together, right? So in order to link all three sets together, it might be a challenge, but we need to start to say, okay, we have media metrics, and regardless of whether it's pay, earn, own, share channels, we have those metrics captured. How can we link that to, for example, the surveys that the companies are conducting? And usually I know it's a different group that's doing that. Right, so it's a question of how do we bring that together, whether it's just the NPS score or the brand tracking survey. A lot of companies, they do the brand tracking survey, right? So how do we link that to the media metrics we have? And then also, how do we link that to the business metrics that we saw earlier, right? In terms of whether it's sales lead, and I think for some public companies, I think there are some studies that you can actually get to the share price. It's not going to be a simple and direct and one straight line type of relationship, right? But it shouldn't prevent us from starting to see when we talk about having an integrated framework of metrics, part of that, and actually I think the more important part than just, okay, let's bring all the metrics together and map them into a different category. I think the more important part is how do we get to that point where we link them together? I think when we can get that and have case study to demonstrate that, that will be very powerful, I think, to take it to the C-suite in terms of, showing them the results of PR and communication campaigns. Okay. So I already mentioned that. And so part of what we want to do is in terms of also clarifying AMEC's role. As you can see, we also still, some MEC, I think Jeremy talked about awareness of measurement principles. We have about 40%. And then the metrics framework, that's even lower, right? So we clearly has more work to do. So I leave three main bullets here for our discussion and breakout, right? What does an integrated set of measurement metrics look like, right? And how do we link those metrics that I set out in those three areas? And also, how do we move this forward with tangible results? I think we need to keep up the momentum in order to be able to actually keep carrying forward. And I think that's the end.
Christina, thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for setting the scene. Just to let everybody know, hard copies of the report that Christina was referring to are available for $49.99 on the Gorkana stand. I'm kidding, they are free. There is also, in a digital world, we have a digital link. So we will be tweeting that. I think I'll ask the Gorkana team to tweet that now. But now it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Richard Bagnall, CEO of Prime Research, and Elaine Phillips, Head of Comms Research and Evaluation at DEFRA. Both of whom are also AMEC board members. Richard, over to you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, everyone. Hello again. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our journey so far and where we've got to, and then a straw man of what we think we need to be making, the changes that we might want to be making to come up with an integrated framework. The work's not done. Part of our view is that work needs to be completed. The AMEC Social Media Measurement Group was created in 2011, and it was created in response to a need of the change that was going on all around us in the industry. You don't need me to talk to you about the changes that are happening in the media, the decline in media, the way that we've heard again and again how PR is changing, content marketing, we're competing for attention and relevance, networks, viral audiences, fragmentation of audiences, the way that people find their news has changed. It's actually starting to create a change in audience behavior as well. This concept of skim and a whim, people just flicking from article to article, they just read the headline, they often don't even read the content. A lot of research is showing that people are now less informed rather than more informed, even though there's more content available. Everything around us in an industry was changing, and changing very fast. And the mainstream media itself has started to question the metrics that it's relied on for many years as whether they're still valid. And a lot of you will have heard of Jeff Jarvis. He's a very well-known media commentator and a Guardian journalist, and also credited as being the first blogger that created the first social media crisis with a case study which you can find online called Dale Hell. What Jeff says is that we shouldn't be looking at the old mass media metrics of thousands of eyeballs, which might sound familiar to an awful lot of us, that watched our message, but instead by answering, did we help you meet your goals, improve your life, and improve your community? And if we think about that, that's very much what we've been talking about for this conference. It's not just the outputs, but what's actually happened as a result of this. So back in 2011, when we launched the group, the first thing we thought we'd do was talk to the industry, and we created an event called the Big Ask, and we had a number of speakers, including this gentleman, who's Stephen Waddington, who is now at Ketchum, although he wasn't at the time, and subsequently became the president of the Chartered Institute of Public Relations. And Wad stood there and blasted this horn at us all, and read us the Riot Act, and read us a wake-up call. And you can see what he said. We must stop counting for the sake of counting. We have to align to the metrics of the organisation. So that was the challenge that our group was set with. How can we, in a world of just numbers that are everywhere, but actually finding the meaning and measuring what really matters is getting more and more difficult? What was it that we needed to do? Barry yesterday made a fantastic tribute to Don Bartholomew, who worked with me and basically led this work, and unfortunately passed away. Don and I, at the Measurement Summit in 2013 in Madrid, we launched the results of the work that we've been working on, which were these social media measurement frameworks. And we actually launched two for a reason. So here was the first one. The steps across the horizontal axis stay the same, but on the vertical axis they change. So the first one we proposed was with program, channel, and business metrics. I think both of us very quickly moved away from this one because it was too tempting for people to continue to count the things that are easy to count and not move towards the real outcomes. Just to explain those steps across the top, and to remind us of a slide that Meredith showed us yesterday. I just took this straight out of her deck. But these are the explanations of each of those steps. The reason we chose them was that they basically mimic a marketing funnel, but they talk the same language of another group that was going on at the time, which is called the Social Media Conclave, which was something that was happening out of the US and was making a big thing about how it was going to set standards. Well, those standards never materialized, surprise, surprise, but what those standards have really become is common definitions, and there's a massive need in our industry for agreed common definitions and for all of us to mean what we say and say what we mean. I don't think that we always do that. But those are the definitions that we suggested putting across it. But I think what you can see is, to us bunch of data nerds in here, it might make sense. But when you start to apply this to PR people outside of our closed community, you can see how people can very quickly start to get lost. The second framework that we put forward, and the one that I've always focused on, is this one. And Don has, being part of Ketchum, where they had the paid, earned, shared, and owned, he often used it with shared in there as well. And so we put this one forward as well. So you could choose your metrics across that funnel for each of those different tools effectively available to the PR community. What we realized was that this framework in itself is actually misnamed, calling it a social media measurement framework. It's, a wake-up moment for us was that actually this is an integrated measurement framework. It's a very basic integrated measurement framework because these are integrated communications techniques that are up there on the framework. So calling it the social media measurement framework perhaps was a mistake. We launched it then 2 years ago. Last year, we wanted to get more momentum behind it. So you'll remember that We got a lot of support from different trade associations, the PRCA, Francis is here, thank you Francis, the CIPR, the Cabinet Office, all endorsed it with AMEC, very powerful groups to endorse our work and help us to promote it. And we put a lot of work, thank you Jonna and Elaine particularly as well, into creating a user guide and a video and a case study to really explain how this works. And working with Elaine and with Alex Aitken at the Cabinet Office, we've also been able to sort of inject this approach into a lot of government communications. And Elaine did well, she's used it a lot, but she's done a case study for us as well. And I'm going to hand over to Elaine now, just to tell us a bit about the feedback that we've had. Elaine and I have run training sessions on it inside Whitehall as well. So a bit of the feedback on what we found.
Thanks, Richard. Yes, so I'm Elaine Phillips. As Richard said, I work in the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, and have been privileged to work with Alex Aitken on the programme about sort of really upskilling all of our communications staff and making sure that we're using sort of proper measurement across all of our communications. I'm going to very briefly, in a few minutes, just tell you about my experience and what we've seen, as Richard said, sort of coming out of what those learnings have told us. And I've got 5 key learnings that I'm going to share with you that we've seen come through regularly. I echo some of the findings that have been coming through what Christina covered in the research. And for the past 2 years, we've been really doing a lot of this work. So we've used the framework extensively, and it was actually really great to see it come up yesterday at the Nissan presentation and also the Beef USA presentation. So clearly it's being used elsewhere too. So I'm going to try and get some feedback from them too. I think, certainly from a government perspective, we really welcomed that AMEC was stepping up to the challenge to try to bring in these new frameworks. And like Richard said, you know, we did contribute to those. It was supported by a number of people, including PRCA, ECO, CIPR, Cabinet Office as well. So we started using it, but we soon started to learn lessons because, like anything, once you put it into practice, you do start to see, you know, what's working well, what's not, and that's been actually very, very helpful for today's session. So 5 key things. The first thing we learned was that actually the framework is a really helpful planning tool. We don't use it enough, and we need to do a lot more focus on sort of planning more generally when we're talking about measurement. It also helped us focus towards the right-hand side of that framework, because that's where the real outcomes take place. That's where we make a difference to people's lives. Like Alex said yesterday, it's all about, for us, saving and improving lives. That's where we see the difference, and that's where we're focused. So I think it's been very helpful for that. The second thing we found was that non-experts all across government, and I know externally and in the private sector too, that if you're not an expert in evaluation, that some of it was confusing, and people found it difficult to know where exactly to place their metrics within the framework. So there's been a lot of support that we've put in to try to help people through that journey and to upskill them and to train them and to show them how to do it in a very sort of systematic way. The third thing we found was that because there were a number of frameworks, there was also a selection element where we were having to help and support people through the selection. You know, which framework am I going to use? What's the difference between the valid framework and the social media measurement framework? Why does the framework have non-social media metrics in it? Well, but of course they have to. So there were a number of things that sort of didn't quite always fit. So we probably need to sort of look at those things as well. And also, I don't know if you noticed on the framework that Richard had up a few moments ago, but the paid owned earned one, for example, which is the one that we use most, on the right-hand side, where it does talk about outcomes, it forces us to put to link our outcomes to paid or owned or earned, and that's often quite difficult. And sometimes we will have a specific goal, and the outcome, hopefully, will be that we have achieved that objective, regardless of whether we can tie it back to paid or owned or earned. So that was just an interesting sort of finding. The fourth thing was the terminology and the language. Again, you know, our non-experts who we were trying to sort of upskill often found it quite confusing to see the different sort of language that's used in all the different marketing funnels that we see. You probably only have to do a Google search and you can see all the different terms. They all roughly mean the same thing, but it does cause confusion to many people. And certainly in government, I know Alex talks about this a lot, the OASIS model, but we very much focus on a few key things. We have input and output metrics, which we're all, I know, very familiar with, but also then focusing on the sort of business side of things and focusing and driving towards the outcome measures and the outtake measures at the opposite end of the scale. And the final thing is that I think what we recognise now is that we would really benefit from an interactive tool as something that will help us through the journey, because it is resource heavy trying to support people through this journey. And because different campaigns and different individuals and different departments will be on a different section of their journey. Some will be very advanced, some will be less so, some will have very complex campaigns. They'll be at different levels and they sort of need different levels of support, and that's very difficult to administer. So what we think would be very helpful and would be very welcome would be a very sort of integrated and interactive tool in some way that would help us through that journey as well. So 5 key things I told you. The first one was about planning and focusing on outcomes. The second one was about non-experts not understanding. The third one is about sort of the various frameworks and the potential for really us trying to scale that down to 1. The fourth one was about the terminology and trying to focus on the outcomes too. And the last one being sort of a benefit from an interactive and integrated tool. So Richard's group has done plenty of work in this field, and there's some thought gone into some initial shaping of what a potential tool might look like, what this framework is going to do for us, and how that might benefit us in all of our organisations. And we really do welcome, certainly from a government perspective, we really welcome AMEC taking the leadership role in this and using our combined expertise to make this into something that's really going to benefit all of our businesses. So I'm going to hand back over to Richard, who's going to show us some of that work so far.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Elaine. So, as Elaine said, we formed a working group to look at what we might do. One of the key challenges then was to simplify it, to make it approachable for all users who are outside of our group. And some of these things here are just a change of emphasis. One of the bits of feedback we had was, well, hold on, the biggest work that we do is earned media work. Why does it start with paid and then owned? So we just moved earned to the top, for example. That point that Elaine was, thank you. The point that Elaine was making about, well, people were trying to almost attribute an outtake or an outcome against one of those channels. Well, the outtake and the outcome, of course, is a result of all of those things. So I should give a big nod to Mr. Paul Hendo, who's sitting at the back, who helped with our thinking on this as well. But we don't think it's finished in any shape or form. It's very similar. You can see the language has changed. It's much easier to understand. We think it will help to drive adoption. It can work across campaigns. It can work across ongoing work, however you like. One of the really key things is we have to encourage communicators to plan before they action, because if they don't plan, we can't measure meaningfully their work. All we can do is count stuff, which is what one of the biggest problems we have is. We do not have a paucity of metrics. We're not going to invent a new metric. We have the Barcelona principles, which are a 30,000-foot view. What we have to do is help people operationalize those principles against different objectives, different campaigns, different organizations. And I think this framework will help. And our proposition might be that we'll abandon all of the other frameworks, and this will be AMEC's valid metric framework, which will give us all something to achieve what we all want to do, which is to be experts, consultative, insights building, measurement professionals for our client base, and it will add value to the AMEC membership. We want to make it interactive, as Elaine said. Here's some ideas that we've had in terms of how that might work. Our vision is that any client would be able to come to AMEC's website, where there'd be a tool, and would be able to input their plans, set their targets, define what success looks like, get a list of suggested metrics that comes out, and effectively write their communications plan and just press print, and it will come out of AMEC's website. And I think that would be a very powerful asset for us. It must be credible and meaningful. And And the last word from me is not from me, it's from Don. And what Don said, and I did mean to highlight a link, but I'll tweet it out later because the video of Don and my presentation from 2 years ago is as valid today. I've watched it again over the last week. It's as valid today as it was 2 years ago. And what I've noticed is, unfortunately, on YouTube, it's been set to private. So unless you know the URL, you can't find it. So it hasn't had many views. But I'll send it out. Please go and watch it again. What Don said is, look, these are only the frameworks we had were a first draft, and we want feedback, we want to adapt them, we want to change them, and I know that he'd be approving of what we're doing here. And this is a quote from that day in Madrid. He said, we're trying to make it both simple, flexible, and sensible, so we can get people to use it, adopt it, and feel comfortable with it. And I think as we break into our groups, if we keep those words in mind, we'd be doing ourselves a favour.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that setup. I think that has teed us up wonderfully for the afternoon. We are now going to break into two groups, two discussion groups. Group A is going to stay in here and is going to discuss further the integrated model that Richard and Elaine have just proposed. Discussion Group B are going to go into the panorama room with David Gallagher and Chris Foster. They'll be talking about how we can better promote the Barcelona principle.